And welcome to the One More Thing podcast. Today I'm joined with Dr. Troy Doucet.
What's going on?
How are you doing today?
Oh, man, I'm tired.
You feeling all right?
I am, man. It's a good weekend. I'm tired, but, here we go.
So it was Lean In week 2.
Week 2.
You did 2 parables. You did the lost sheep and the lost coin.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm assuming Lean In is kind of going off of a lot of these parables that Jesus told.
Yeah.
And trying to reconcile people's understanding of who God is and his heart, and kind of goes against what the Pharisees of that day
That's right.
talked about. So why these 2 together in 1 week?
Yeah, just time-wise, when we sat to kind of plan out, we sort of said we'll hit these 2 in 1 week because they fall underneath the same sort of premise of what we were going for in week 2. And so week 1 was the introduction, looking at the idea of sinners and sin.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to be lost this week? Because if you read the parables, man, in Luke 15, the focus is not on the thing or the object or the animal, in this case, being lost, but that idea of the relentless pursuit. Because it doesn't say if I find the sheep or if I find, it says when. And so there's this sort of relentless determination on God's part that if you say when, that there will never be a time when all or some or one or a few will be lost. We're always going to be found. And what we looked at is like, we're always found is because we're never truly lost.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting too, because, there's when the Christian world talks about someone being lost, it's always on the person to come back.
Yes.
So if you look at that story, that sheep didn't come back on its own.
No.
The shepherd went out and
that's right.
got him.
And the shepherd doesn't, like I made the joke with, sort of giving the image of the sheep on my back. And I said, most of us, if our kid runs off or someone does us something, we catch up with them, we're like, oh, I'm going to show you, I'm going to teach you a lesson. But the shepherd doesn't follow that pattern, that narrative of discipline or retribution, retaliation. He says, call the neighbors, I found my lost sheep.
Right.
And he's celebrating the victory. Same thing with the coin. So we focus primarily on the idea, the understanding of what it means to be lost, because it's always sort of constructed around this notion of this person is this and this. And it's always this in, out. This person is saved. This lost person is unsaved. This person's going to heaven. This person's going to hell. And so it gave us sort of a little gap, an opportunity to talk about the notion of being saved and salvific ideas of atonement. Yeah. And trying to correct that, because that's the purpose of the parable, is to correct narrow thinking and bad theology that is oppressive and harmful and fear-driven. And so, that's where we went, man.
I know you were nervous about kickback, just elephant in the room.
Yeah.
I know there was the portion of your sermon that talked about atonement.
Yeah.
And I love how you guys always put it as at one mint.
Yep.
Like, what is this thing what did Jesus accomplish on the cross?
Yeah.
And so I think for a lot of people, this was like the first time it really clicked, just from conversations I had afterwards and emails that you got, text messages you got. So I kind of wanted to break this down a little bit more.
Yeah.
When we're talking about sacrifice, when we have this like imagery of what fundamental evangelical Christianity puts out, that Jesus Christ had to die as a sacrifice for our sins to appease God's justice, is essentially like the one sentence. And this usually seems to be the straw man argument for a lot of people against Christianity.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, so you're telling me that you believe in a God that sent himself down to earth to kill himself to make himself feel better.
Yeah, to appease his
wrath.
Yeah.
It falls apart really quickly.
Oh, super quick.
So I think, even if we were going to just use the Bible as our reference for our belief, outside of, we can go over the fact that this specific atonement theory, penal substitutionary atonement, is the newest of the atonement theory, one of the newest of the atonement theories. This for the first 1,500 years of the church, this atonement theory wasn't even thought of
right.
as truth or doctrine or whatever.
That's right.
If we're going to use the Bible as like our basis for our belief of what Jesus came to accomplish on the cross or on earth and what happened on the cross, where else can we look in the Bible that would support the idea that Jesus necessarily wasn't a sacrifice to God, but he believed in his message so much that his sacrifice on the cross was, I believe in this message, in this revolution so much that I'm willing to take my message to the cross and die for this message.
Yeah.
Do you like where else can we find this?
You can look at a lot of the Pauline letters where he talks about this notion of the scandal of the cross, and again, the sound of two hands clapping.
Right.
For the evangelical mind, the scandal of the cross, the absurdity of the cross is what we call absurd. Like, no, dude, God not sending himself to die in the form of a human to appease himself. And then you get into the whole conflict of, well, if Jesus was God, he knew the future in a particular kind of way. So he knows, I got to go through this crap for 3 days, but hey, on the third day, I'm coming back. Like, who wouldn't do that?
Yeah.
Like that, for me, that notion right there completely discounts the notion of a sacrifice. How can it be a sacrifice if you know you're coming back?
Right.
If you told me I could save the world, I mean, just my 3 children.
Right.
You could save your 3 children by going through this horrendous ordeal, but 3 days later you're going to come back and everything's going to be good. You just got to endure this. I would do it for my 3 children without question.
Right.
So there's all that aspect, that baggage that goes often unthought of. But when I think Paul talks, how I read it, when he talks about the scandalion, the scandal of the cross, it's really pointing to the fact that the absurdity of Jesus' death was the absurdity of all sacrificial offerings to God.
Right.
Right? You cannot look at the cross and say that this is a sacrifice to God and then read Abraham's story when God says, don't sacrifice your son there. Like, there's so many contradictions that come up just logically. But immediately, us and evangelicals, our starting point is very different on what the Bible is. We use the Bible as a text, as a guide, but we don't place any imposition upon the Bible that I think is unfair, that it's 100% accurate and 100% absolutely true, and it's a science book, and it's
a rule book.
The whole inerrancy thing.
Yeah.
We start with the Bible, but in a very different lens. And so that's an immediate discount right there when I'm trying to converse with my more evangelical friends about what atonement theory is true.
Right.
There's 7 or 8 different theories, man, and the penal substitution is by far the most awful. Because if you hold to that absolutely, then what I said Sunday was true, is that if God needed an atoning sacrifice and an atoning substitution for my wrongdoing, and Jesus was it, then I don't need any of Jesus's teachings at all. I don't need the 30 years of his life. I just need the last 3 days or 3 hours.
Right.
And I'm good.
Yeah.
So
that's always an argument too, is like, well, if Jesus's purpose on this earth was to be a sacrifice, why 33 years? Why not kill him when he's an unconscious baby, not really aware of what's going on? The argument falls apart really quickly, and it honestly, like, that was one of those things that I let go of really quickly because it made sense to me. It's like what you talked about, propitiation, expiation. Did Jesus come to change our mind about God, or did Jesus come to change God's mind about us? And what makes the most sense with the Jesus that God presents in the text?
And I think what was beautiful was sort of the video rhetoric we used at the end with the woman confronting her son's killer, and the grace and love in the midst of pain. Like, you can't discount, this woman is in absolute pain and still offers. And I said, now, which one do you think reflects the heart of God? the story we see, or the one that we can imagine where she curses him and cast him into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth?
Right.
Like, the sad thing is people cheer for both of those stories when one is really the only true essence of God's heart. The other is the essence of the human heart, bro.
Right.
And, you know.
Yeah,
so.
I think a lot of times, and this is one of the things we discussed in prepping for the weekend, was that we put our own sense of what we believe justice to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we put our own human sense of justice onto what we believe God's justice should be.
That's right.
So when you hear the fundamental Christians say, well, God is love, yes, but he is also justice.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what is justice to God? Is it your version of justice? Is it my version of justice?
Yeah.
Is it that lady's version of justice because she forgave him?
That's right.
One of the most horrific things that you could personally do to a person, like personally do to somebody else, is kill their kid.
Yeah.
Like that, I can't imagine anything worse.
No.
And so I, like when we saw that video, I was like, she's way better human than I.
Yeah. There's no way. And I think the argument is, honestly, there's no way I could do that.
Yeah.
There's no way you can do it.
Yeah.
But that's the power of God, right? The only way you can do it is in the midst of your own sort of turmoil and grief to offer, forgiveness and grace.
Yeah.
And she does it, dude.
Yeah.
Which shows us that it's possible, but how it's possible is the big question.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to cast someone to the wolves, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, and you get those stories afterwards of people who contact us and text us, shoot us a Facebook message. I was walking through one of the similar stories, with my daughter who did something at school where now she enacted her own retaliatory sense of justice on someone, and I'm having to walk with her through that and say, hey, how'd that make you feel?
Right.
Is that the kind of person you want to become? And her answers are no.
Mm-hmm.
And she's being honest, but it feels good in the moment, right?
Yeah.
To have that sense of revenge and retaliation, to get even. But it's the myth, man. It's a myth of redemptive violence, and the story of Jesus dying for your sins as a substitution or a replacement. It falls into that sort of spin as well, man.
Yeah. Now, why do you think that specific atonement theory kind of persevered and almost became the only doctrine that was allowed within Christianity?
Oh, that's a scary question. You'd want to say because it was a good argument.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately it reflected some aspects of culture and society, our need for justice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our sense of justice as being retaliatory. But it's a very, it's a very emotional story.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we love the sacrificial story of someone putting their life on the line for someone else.
Right.
But all those stories, there's something that precipitated or necessitated that sacrifice. Like jumping on a grenade to save your troops.
Right.
Right? Yeah, but this dude didn't come back,
Yeah.
There's that sort of sacrifice for the greater good. But in the story of God, there's no need for the sacrifice. There's no need. God is all-powerful, all-loving. And Jesus is killed by the powers of the time because of the message he was bringing and the upheaval of the social hierarchy that was in place from more of a religious standpoint. The Romans didn't want to kill him.
No.
The Romans were like, dude,
No.
get this dude away.
Yeah.
Like, he's your problem. This is a theological problem
Right.
of how you've come to view God and sort of constitute God. You guys deal with him. So the Romans saw no fault in him at all to kill him. But it was the religious elite.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what they do? What they've done for centuries. If you were a heretic, and here's the truth, man, all heresy comes from the Bible.
Yeah.
There's no external biblical. Even you can look at the Mormon Church and their various doctrines and covenants, the Book of Mormon, the Pearl of Great Price. All those books come from interpretations of the Bible. Same thing with any other sort of offshoot of Christianity, Jehovah's Witnesses,
Mm-hmm.
their interpretation of the Bible.
Right.
what we do here at Suncoast, how we sort of deny that substitutionary atonement theory. Where do we get that? From the Bible.
Right.
This is nothing new. It's nothing new. It's not like we're preaching this radical new gospel here. We're probably teaching a radical gospel because it is radical. Because you know the word radical comes from the word radish, which is a root, which is the root of Christianity. And the closer you stay to the root of the authenticity of it, it becomes radical as things progress. And so to simply say God loves you and God is within you, and we are trying to awaken that sensibility that you have the power within you to love people when they least expect it, when they least deserve it, like you just saw in this video.
Yeah.
You have the power to change a life just by giving a thumbs up when you don't feel like it.
Yeah.
By letting someone cut in front of you in the grocery line, whatever the case may be. All of these things, man, perturb us and irritate us to the nth degree. That's why we have new words like road rage, and because we're so self-centered, man. We're so anthropomorphic, even in our religion. When I talked about the trees yesterday, what does a tree do? All of that stuff is a projection of human convenience and, you know, anthropomorphism. We projecting worth and value onto something so long as it benefits us. And that was the atonement theory. It benefits church growth because I can create fear into your mind and create not unity, but uniformity.
Right.
And if you don't feel, if you don't believe this, you're out. And people love social contact, and we don't want to feel I don't belong anymore because I don't believe this BS story. That in itself, not the truth of the sentiment of the substitutionary atonement, but the truth of the sentiment is I want to belong. And if belonging means I have to believe this BS, then it becomes cognitive dissonance, man.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was a long ramble over.
No, I loved it though.
You know.
Well, what was the line that you said yesterday? If the gospel...
if the gospel of Jesus is not good news for everybody, then it isn't good news for anybody.
Yeah.
And that's true, man. Jesus comes, and you read Romans 5, it's there. No matter what you look at the Bible at, if you look at it as inerrant or infallible or kind of like we do, just as sort of a baseline text of how to live, it's pretty clear. It says, by one man's act of disobedience, all or many became sinners, right? But by one man's obedience to God, all became justified. So God's justice is wrapped up in the life that Jesus lives, not by the death, burial, resurrection. Jesus comes back. I believe in the physical resurrection of Christ, but it wasn't to do with anything other than this gesture. You can't kill the truth, man.
Yeah.
You can't kill the truth. And so,
well, I came up to you afterwards on Sunday and just gave you a big hug and said, if they don't get it after that one, I don't know what else. I don't know what else you could do. I mean, you did such an incredible job. One of your best sermons that you've delivered. I keep saying that because they just keep getting better.
Yeah, man. Thanks.
But it was so clearly articulated and so palatable, in a very, very complex. It's hard. It's hard to deliver a theologically dense sermon like that and make it palatable. And that's one of the strengths of our teaching team is you guys do such an amazing job of taking these complex theological ideas and using relatable, like real world stories.
Yeah.
Like the lady at the end, you know, like if she has more love in her than the God that we claim to be all powerful, all knowing, and all loving, if she can imagine more love, then God's not all powerful and all loving. You can't say that.
Yeah.
So it just sealed the deal. I thought it was amazing, and obviously you've gotten so much good feedback.
Yeah.
So great job, and
appreciate it. Yeah, man. I just want to say, like, it's always, you know, I get the honor and privilege to deliver that message, and that in itself is, it takes some energy, it takes some prep. But I mean, Larry, Brett, you, the team, like, it's a collaborative effort, man, each and every week, because you know, we want to speak not necessarily the same language, but we want to speak similar languages
Right.
when we're presenting something, like you said, that's as dense theologically as this.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the beauty of our team too, because we do have a lot of different, we don't all believe the same thing.
No.
Like, I don't believe in a physical resurrection,
Right.
but you do.
Yeah.
But that doesn't pit us against each other and
right.
say like, well, I'm going to go off and start another church because
Yeah.
we don't agree on this.
No,
and
no.
that has been the reality of the church
right.
for hundreds of years now.
That's
you
right.
know, if we can't agree on this one theological
That's right.
statement,
That's right.
then
Yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
go off and start my own.
That's right.
You know, and so I think that's the beauty of this place. We have Catholics that come here. We have Jewish faith people that come
That's
here.
right.
We have atheist people that come here.
That's
Like
right.
literally every
Wiccans.
Wiccans we have.
Here. Yeah, man, it's
Somebody's-
amazing.
But they love the community and they love the acceptance and they love the message that we're pushing out, because
right.
this message will change the world. And we're
Yep.
seeing this. Like, we had some staff members go to Orange Orange conference.
Yes.
Just this past week, and they were so encouraged because they were like, "Man, okay, maybe the church is getting this. We've
Yeah,
been
yeah.
here for a couple of years, but the church is getting this."
That's right.
You know, and so it's really cool to see.
Churches are they're in a state of transition, man.
Yeah.
Like the whole state of Christianity's in transition.
Yeah.
And we're on the forefront of that.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and it's growing in people's minds, it's growing in people's hearts, that there's more to God than just these doctrinal, creedal, you know, even constitutional communities that built around this very rigorous and narrow-minded idea.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's exciting to be a part of, man. The work we're doing here is amazing.
Yeah. I remember just yesterday, Laura and I were just getting ready for bed, and I just looked at her. I'm like, "Man, I'm so glad Troy's here.
Oh man,
I'm just so happy you're here."
yeah.
I know the team is that way, and I know you feel the same about this place. So
Yeah, you know, and it's interesting how quick the messages we preach get out there. You know, I had the church in Dallas reach out to me and said, even if you won't come, can you please help consult? And that's huge, dude.
Yeah.
For an area like that, a very progressive church, very, very like hip. Making that transition from a very, you know, conservative assemblies ideology to now what we're doing here, whatever it is. You know, I'm always reluctant to put labels on things, but
Right.
the more authentic nature of
Right.
God's heart, man. So, but it's fun to see. It's fun to see, and I think there'll be other churches coming out the woodworks to say, "Can you help us model this transition for us?"
Yeah.
So,
No,
get
there's a
ready.
lot. According to Brian McLaren, he's like, there's a lot of churches out there that are
yeah.
wanting to do this. Like, they're scared. you
That's
know?
right.
So if we can be like, "Hey, we've been down this road.
That's right.
We've taken a beating.
Dude.
But I'll tell you one thing, it's worth it in the end."
That's it, man.
So, all right, man. Well, thank you so much for being on One More Thing.
Awesome.
And we'll see you next week.
See ya.